Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today on the Freemium Podcast, our third-time guest, Mr. Bill Mitchell. He is the founder and portfolio manager of the Palos Mitchell Alpha Fund. Good to have you on.
Pleasure to be here.
And as always with the finance and stock guys, we got to make a disclaimer. Today, anything we say is not to be construed as investment advice, and the opinions expressed today are not those of Palos. They are those of Bill. Actually, I don't even think today you're going to give any opinions. It's just going to be a dull podcast, only facts.
Yeah, let's do that. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah. So thanks for coming on. We were discussing earlier about what we were going to talk about, kind of just winging it. Yeah. And let's start off with markets. I haven't actually checked my phone in a while with markets, and I haven't even watched CNBC. Like I was just telling you earlier, I kind of shut down all my apps, and I find my mind actually a little bit more clear in the morning, and my heart rate doesn't go up. You know what I mean? Sometimes you wake up, the first thing you check is your phone, and you can find that your heart rate starts going, and the anxiety actually kicks in. Do you get that too?
I know that all too well, sadly.
It's terrible.
It is. I mean, I love what I do, so I can't wait for the day to get started. And if stuff happens overnight, I'm not sure if you know this or not, but trading starts at 4 o'clock in the morning, electronic trading. So you get a sort of a signal as to where the markets are going to go on that day based on what's happening overnight. And with bond prices, commodities, global markets. So unfortunately, sometimes if I do wake up in the middle of the night, I can't help but reach for my phone. And I can't kick that habit.
Do you always check the tickers, the stock tickers?
I have my portfolio on my phone.
Oh, so is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, it's good when I'm away from the office. You're never away from the market, so you can see what's going on. But it does become...
You're a slave.
In a way, but a willing slave, I guess I could put it that way. Canadian markets don't really have a pre-market, so at least I'm not subject to looking at those. It's U.S. that has the pre-market trading on an electronic platform.
And the market you always look at is always the S&P?
I look at S&P, NASDAQ, TSX, commodities, bond markets, individual stocks. Typical day would be, emails come in from the various brokers that we deal with. They provide us with research, sort of a morning opening note, like what happened overnight, what's going to happen today.
And that's from Bloomberg?
No, it's from each of the brokers. Like we deal regularly with a dozen brokers that I talk to on a regular basis. So they give us research.
Every day?
Every day you get a morning note.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's the day kicks off. It's between 7 and 7:30 with those, which is a really quick way to catch up on what's happened overnight.
It's like a summary of what happened overnight.
Yeah, and what to expect.
These guys are up at what time? 3:30, 4 in the morning?
I'm not sure. I know there was one firm who had that person positioned in the UK. So they were sending it out from the UK.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, normal human being hours. But it's also valuable because it'll give you a heads up on who's reporting earnings before the close or after the close, or if the Fed is going to announce rates as they did this week. You know what's coming, so you know what to look for and tune into.
So what's going on with the markets? We can talk about the Fed. We can talk about the markets. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of things today. We're going to talk about energy. We're going to talk about productivity in Canada. We're going to talk about inflation slowing. What else do we got here? Talk about foreign investors shunning Canada. This is a really big issue, kind of tied to productivity. We could briefly touch on ESG. No opinions, but just the facts. There are capital outflows in the ESG funds. I'm not going to get you in trouble. I'm kind of happy to see it. I thought it was a big marketing scheme But anyways, we'll leave it at that. We'll talk about it a little bit later. But so what's going on in markets today, or let's say over the past month? Are they kind of, you just mentioned a little bit earlier that we've reached new highs. That's in the TSX. Is that in the S&P and NASDAQ as well?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Japan.
So everybody.
Most European indices. Yeah. Even Canada has finally caught up.
Is that because of currency devaluation, or is that because earnings are getting better, companies are getting better? Or because whenever I look at these things, I'm always going, okay, markets are reaching new high, but if a company's earnings is 2x versus what it was 30 years ago, it's actually probably less efficient than 30 years ago because the dollar has lost more than that amount in the same amount of time. Does that make sense?
I could be part of it.
That's a whole other debate. Let's talk. What's going on in the markets right
But
now?
Markets, markets are forward-looking, of course, right?
Yes.
The prices today are reflective of what investors anticipate is going to happen down the road.
Yeah.
Because if you base it on what's happening in the world today, the world's a mess.
Yes.
We've dealt with inflation. We've got 2 wars going on right now. It's really the prospects for the future don't look good if you're looking at the headlines. The reality is obviously we think things are going to get better. I mean, interest rates impacted, individuals, households with higher payments for mortgages and credit cards and so on and so forth. So the Fed has been explicit in saying that, we're raising interest rates aggressively to fight inflation. This is a story that goes back a couple of years now. So it appears that they're starting to win that battle against inflation. There are signs that it's coming back to the 2% target in both Canada and in the U.S. In fact, in Canada, I was reading a report this week that inflation is actually now below 2% if you X out rent, like real estate.
I hate when they play that game.
Yeah.
But the reality is that's a big part of everyone's day-to-day living. So I hate when the statisticians do that and they go, oh, but if we take this out, everything's fine. It's like, okay, but you can't just take out rent. Everyone has to pay for rent or they have to pay for their mortgage. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So I hate when they play that game. But
and of course, one of the reasons for that is immigration.
Yes.
Because people that come to this country need somewhere to live. So that impacts the rent.
Yes.
That's an issue that going forward, it appears that we're going to keep with almost the same level of immigration, which opens up a whole other can of worms down the road. Where are these people going to live? Productivity, actually, which you mentioned just a few minutes ago, is related to immigration and the number of workers we have in this country that might not be as productive as they would have been without the immigration. I'm not an economist. I only know what I read. But that's one factor as well. So, I mean, if inflation comes back into that 2% or sub 2% level, Powell said in the conference, the news conference after the announcement that the Fed was keeping rates where they are, between 5.25 and 5.5, fifth straight consecutive meeting where they've kept them the same. He said, we will lower rates. They anticipate 3 25 basis point cuts. So 3/4 of a
He said that in the
point.
meeting?
Yeah. That's what he's targeting for 2024.
Huh. Okay.
So economists jumped on that right away.
Did the markets rip?
Markets ripping today.
And this announcement was when?
Tuesday it came out Tuesday at 2 p.m. Yeah, and so it's fairly new news.
Yeah.
So I think the worry about rates keep to go higher is kind of off the table. So again, markets look forward, not backwards. So they're looking at where will we be at the end of the year if we have 75 basis points lower on interest rates. That will be good for the economy. It will be good for people that carry credit. So all these things play into a bull market.
Good for tech stocks.
We're in a bull market. I mean, I don't see how you can say we're not in a bull market because we're making new highs.
And also too, because I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were talking about a lot of the fundamentals. I mean, if we look at a lot of tech stocks, take away Google, take away Facebook, take away like the big guys, but tech stocks, and this is private and publicly traded companies, there was a massive correction in the tech sector. Like there were some companies that were down 80% in valuation.
Yeah, 2022 was a bad year.
Yeah, and so I don't understand when some people go, oh, we're back in the fundamentals aren't good. This is a massive bubble. This is like the .com bubble in 2000. Would you agree with people that say that right now?
I would not. The difference between the tech bubble, which I vividly remember working through when I was a trader, were the craziest times that I saw in my career. I mean, it was nuts. I mean, stocks would double in a week.
Wow.
And companies that didn't make money. Like if you were .com, there was buyers all over the place.
Pets.com.
Throw the fundamentals out the window. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of these companies never made any money. Today they're making money. And then today, back then it was the internet.
Yeah.
Now it's artificial intelligence or AI.
Yeah.
That's what's really driving this.
Yeah.
So depending who you listen to, what the opinions are out there, the AI phenomenon is in the very early stages. Call it the first inning.
Yeah.
So very, very early. So the prospects for the future for companies that not only provide the tools for AI, like an NVIDIA, for example, which has the premium chip for AI applications, but companies that will use AI will become much more productive, often by replacing humans with AI technology. A typical example would be a call center where you're talking to a machine, you're not talking to a person. but the machine is able to speak in a normal voice and answer your questions on the fly because it's built itself a knowledge base. So that's the Chat GPT type of thing, which is evolving so rapidly. It's mind-boggling.
Crazy.
Jensen Huang, who is the CEO of NVIDIA, was on TV this week, and he said that the current new chip that they're coming out with is 10,000 times faster than the chip they had only 8 years ago.
Jesus.
So that's mind-boggling in itself. Now, the companies that are going to, have no choice really but to go into AI. If you want to remain competitive with other companies, whatever business you're in, you almost have to adopt AI and start using it. So that's sort of the rationale behind the explosion we've seen in AI-related stocks. So I think it's much different than the tech bubble, because tech bubble was, a lot of those companies were a pipe dream. Like you said, throw .com on anything and the stock would go higher. The companies never made money, eventually disappeared, a vast majority of them. That may happen today as well, but it's a real industry, and it's really early, and it's probably going to have explosive growth.
The All In podcast that I listen to all the time, they were saying that due to AI, they're predicting, they don't know when, but there will be a one-person billion-dollar company eventually, just because of AI and how much you're able to automate all of the web development, all the other features. They were given examples as well of some call centers that when you call, not only do they speak in English, they can understand what you're saying. They can speak in different languages. They can speak with an accent. They can speak with, so if you're living in London, England, the person you're speaking to on the phone can have a British accent. If you're speaking to someone here in Canada, you can have a Canadian accent. You could speak in French. This is definitely the future. And there was another example. I want to say it was Google. I don't think it was Google though. And it was a cold call. AI was cold calling someone, asking about. So they just purchased the Oculus from Facebook, and they were asking. It was an Apple cold call, an AI cold call, and it was like making the sale. It's like, hey, how come you didn't want to buy the Apple product? He goes, well, it's really expensive, and he was overcoming the objections.
Yeah.
Obviously, it had been trained to overcome the objections, but it's like a live cold call speaking to AI, and the person on the other end of the phone didn't know that it was AI until the end.
Yeah, it's somewhat frightening. I didn't see this myself, but I read about it. Was part of the show that NVIDIA had was they had two robots on stage. Again, allegedly, I didn't see it, but I heard about it. Is that Jensen Huang was giving instructions to one of the robots, and the robot did not obey the instructions. The robot was making up its own mind not to listen to the directives of the person that's supposed to be able to control the robot. And of course, right away, you think of the Terminator, the sci-fi film about robots taking over the world. So there is a lot of fright around what the future holds for us with AI.
And AI too, like a lot of people have a misunderstanding, and I'm not sure if it was you that I was discussing with on the last podcast. It's Jeff Bezos said this. He's like, this isn't us creating better and smarter computers. He goes, we are discovering what they're able to do and understand.
Yeah.
And that blew my brain too. It's like, this is a discovery. This is not us. Yes, there's certain programming coming in, but yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the future. Do you think, are you on the camp that thinks we should regulate more tightly AI, or are you part of the camp that there should be less regulation? Because if we're regulating here in Canada or in the US, and let's say, for example, a country like China or India has way less regulation with AI, that they're going to move ahead so much quicker than we are. Like, which camp are you in? Do you like to have more regulation, or do you like to have less regulation?
Yeah, that's a great debate.
And right now, it's a guess for anyone. There's arguments on both sides.
Yeah. Well, obviously, you can use it for nefarious purposes. I mean, you can use it for military applications.
Of course.
Which, of course, if our adversaries are going to use it, then I guess we have to address that and be able to, respond in kind to whatever they're doing with it. We can't control social media. We can't control Twitter. I mean, elections are being swayed with fake news, allegedly, through social media.
Yeah, on both sides, left and right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So how are you going to, address the voice of Joe Biden phoning you up personally and giving you a pitch, or of Donald Trump phoning you up and giving you a pitch.
Yeah.
Like that can be done with AI.
Yeah.
So with an election coming, how many people are savvy enough to know that this phone call they just got from somebody, from their grandfather, is real or not? Because you can mimic voices.
I heard a clip the other day. It was really, really, really funny. So it was a fake AI pretending to be Justin Trudeau, and on the other end of the line, there was this Quebecois guy, like a blue-collar Quebecois guy, and he hated Justin Trudeau. He goes in French, goes, "I want to know if I can count in the Justin Trudeau voice. I want to know if I can count on your vote come election time." Yeah. He goes, "I'll never fucking vote for you, Trudeau. I never voted for your father. I'll never vote for you. Get the hell out of here." Yeah. And the AI just kept egging him on, and he got more and more angry. Yeah. And he's like, "Are you not listening to me? I'm never going to vote for you." It was really funny to watch.
Yeah. And the latest evolution in AI, in chat, GTP and stuff like that is they're trained now to become more empathetic. Emotional, like recognize the emotions of the person they're speaking to and sort of play into that. And it's at the point, and this is not even something new, this was, revealed months ago. You could get in your car and drive to Toronto, and you could program, I want to have a conversation about the prospects for the Montreal Canadiens, let's say. And you can talk for 5 hours with somebody who will bring up information and talk just like a human being and have a conversation, but you have to realize you're talking to a machine. You're not talking to a real person. Jeez. Yeah.
Do you think AI is going to be good for society or bad in the long run?
In the long run, we have to deal with the reality that we're here now and it's not going away.
No, it's not.
So it can do great things. Things like medical research. Yeah. It can accelerate that incredibly. Productivity, robotics. People will lose jobs, though. That's the thing, right?
But then there's always the other argument. I'm going to play devil's advocate just for a little bit. I mean, if we look at, let's rewind 300 years ago or 200 years ago. I mean, I think there's some crazy stat, like 60 or 70% of the people that worked on a farm. They were farmers. That was their job. Today, if you look at the percentage of people that are actually farmers, it's what, 1%, 2%? Because all the automation, you got all the tractors, you have all, like everything's been automated. You don't need to have people going out and picking stuff themselves, picking the berries. Yeah. You have tractors and machines and engines to do this now. So when you look at AI, couldn't you say that AI is also kind of the same thing? Yes, some jobs are going to be displaced, but at the same time, it's going to create other jobs on the side. You know what I mean? Like, it's just going to create new industries.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Or do you think this time's different?
There's an old saying in markets that this time is different, but really it's never different. I mean, it's new, it's different, it's frightening, it's exciting at the same time. And I mean, really, who knows where this leads to? I mean, there's been debate recently to go to a 4-day work week, which I guess would be a consequence.
Who's debating
of,
that? CBC?
No, I think it was, they already have one, don't they? Or is it 3?
Yeah.
I think it was a European nation, but I'm not sure. But it was like a Western nation that said we want to mandate a 4-day work week.
Oh, was that in
30
Finland?
hour?
It was Finland or something.
30-hour work week. I think in France they already have legally a 35-hour work week.
Okay.
But I believe it was 30 or 4 days, a 4-day work week, because we're becoming more efficient and productive everywhere, it seems, except Canada.
Yeah. All right, so let's jump into that. Let's focus on Canada for a little bit now. So productivity in Canada, for those that don't know, our per capita, yes, our GDP has been going up, but the main reason why our GDP has been going up over the past few years is because we're bringing in a lot of people. And per capita in the world, we immigrate the most people in the entire world, #1 nation per capita. For the past 7 years, our GDP per capita, which is what you should be looking at, has been the same. And there's been a decoupling between us and the US, especially over the past couple of years. Coincidentally, since we changed political parties in 2015, there's been a massive decoupling of GDP per capita. And when the GDP per capita is going down, basically just means we're getting poorer in comparison to different countries. So some people will basically say, well, you shouldn't be comparing us to the United States. That's the United States. They're the biggest economy in the world, yada, yada, yada. But the fact is we are getting poorer as a nation. So where do you want to start with this? Because I'm seeing more and more podcasts, and it's nice to see banks now, Canadian banks, are saying this is a big issue. If we have a productivity issue, and at the same time, the politicians, the leadership in Canada is also attacking the energy sector, which pays for, it's like 40 or 50%. It pays like a massive chunk of our welfare state and how we live today. So if we have a productivity issue and they're attacking an energy sector that basically produces enough money for us to pay for our welfare state, like where does this go? There's a lot to unpack here. Where do we start with this?
Yeah, well, I mean, for comparative reasons, I mean, if we're going to compare ourselves to anyone, it should be the United States.
Yes.
They're right next door to us, and our economies are intertwined.
Yes.
I read a report this week that the standard of living in Canada has dropped to 0.70. If you start with an equal setting, I think it was 2014, we're at 0.76 compared to the U.S. in terms of standard of living, which is related to productivity. So our standard of living has dropped significantly in Canada. There's other numbers out there that I can throw out there, but I mean, I don't know exactly what they were off the top of my head, but something like the worst position we've been in 41 years in Canada, in terms of standard of living.
Can you just, for people to understand this a little bit better, what is a simple definition of productivity? Like when people say, "Oh, we're less productive in this country," what do they mean by that?
Economic output per person, if I was to guess. Economics is not my field of study.
That's and I'll add on to to that, like what we were just talking about a little bit earlier. So it's like, in short, I heard it on the podcast Loonie Hour, it takes, to produce the same dollar of economic output, it takes more than what it used to. So for us, if we're looking at the US, for them to produce $1 of GDP versus us, it'll take less people, less resources to get that dollar than it takes for us. So it takes more resources. That could be debt, that could be people, that could be whatever, to get the same level of output. I have my opinions. I think we have two main factors that's hindering us with regards to productivity. One, and I think this is the one that accounts for the most, is the fact that we have a bloated government. And when I say government, I mean civil servants. We have too many civil servants. They have increased the workforce by 50% since 2015. That is insane. They are not more productive. There are more ministries than ever before. Trudeau's actually created 19 ministries since he came into power. There's like 200 and something ministries. He's created the most ministries, more than any other prime minister in our history. So I think that's one reason why we have less productivity than we should. And anyone who tells you that governmental agencies are productive is either an idiot or they're lying to you. The second thing is, I know we have way too much debt. So if we have to pay, so let's say, for example, at the end of the year, if 10% of all the taxes and money that we collect has to go to interest payments, well, that's a lot. That's money we could be spending on social services, on building roads, on infrastructure spending, all that kind of stuff. So, and we're at a point now where it's going to keep going up. We can get to like 12, 15%. I hope we never get to 20, but never say never. But we could get into the double-digit area where the money we're collecting is just being spent on interest alone. So when you get a guy like Trudeau, no one likes him, so I can say this out loud now. During COVID, remember that question he got asked? Said, "Aren't you worried?" The reporter says, "Aren't you worried about all this debt?" And Trudeau kind of looked at him and bullied him. "Interest rates are at historic lows, Glenn." That was his answer. Well, look where we are now. So let's get on the productivity issue right now. So I want to hear your opinion on kind of what's going on. And this is a major issue going on in Canada. If we don't have productivity, our standard of living is going to fall. And it already has fallen. People are struggling today. It's clear as day, and it's going to continue to fall if we don't clean up our act. And I don't see us clean up our act because they're not going to stop the fiscal spending.
Yeah, the standard of living has fallen significantly. To your first question, I think one of the solutions might be a ministry of ministries to address the overabundance of ministries.
They'll probably create
I'm just
that.
kidding.
I bet you they've discussed it.
Yeah, debt's an issue because the more money you're paying on debt, the less money you have to spend to, on other things.
On productive assets.
For sure.
And the other part too, just sorry to butt in, and the last thing too, we have an economy, like 50% of our economy is based on either real estate or the construction of real estate. This is a non-productive asset. So we're not reinvesting in property, plant, and equipment, creating new businesses that are innovative, that actually provide solutions and value to consumers. We're not good at that in Canada for an array of reasons. And, I don't think we're going to be at the same level as the US. We never have, and I don't think we will be. But I think it's kind of silly to look at it and go, whenever someone says, oh, well, you're comparing our GDP per capita against the US, that's the biggest economy in the world. We can't compare ourselves to them. Let's compare ourselves to someone else. Well, even if we do compare ourselves to other countries, we are getting poorer from a productivity standpoint and a GDP per capita standpoint as well. And a lot of people don't seem to understand this. And one of my buddies that I had on 2-3 weeks ago, his answer was tax the corporations more. That was his answer. He honestly thinks that that's the way to do this.
Yeah.
And you can't tax your way out of this situation. People need to understand, and I can understand why people get a little bit frustrated sometimes, like Loblaws or banks, or they have really high profits. That's a whole other conversation. They do have abnormally large profits. They do get away with certain things that small businesses don't get away with. So there is truth in what they're saying. But when you create these tax laws and incentives, like how it works, if you have like a new tax code for corporations, that's not just, yes, it's going to affect Loblaws, or they'll probably get around it because they have lawyers and lobbyists, but it's going to affect companies like me. It's going to affect other small businesses. I have to deal with the more red tape. I have to deal with the higher taxes. And what this is, and we're going to get on that too, it just ends up businesses and money doesn't want to come to Canada because they go, why the hell would I go to Canada? There's all this red tape. There's all these language laws. There's all these taxes. It's very difficult to operate in this country. Forget it. I'm not going to come there. I'm going to go somewhere else where it's going to be easier. It's going to be a better bang for my buck. I think I'm going to be more successful going to the US. I think I'm going to be more successful going to Germany, going to China, going to India. And so Canadians don't seem to understand that. And the only thing that this government knows how to do, they don't know how to create incentives for businesses to want to come here. All they know how to do is tax. Tax. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And people that can say, oh, you're just a rich businessman. Keep saying that. Let's see where our country is in 10 years.
Yeah, well, capital will flow to where you're going to get the most bang for your buck.
Yes, and it's flowing out of Canada.
Absolutely. We're in the worst predicament in 4 decades or something. I read that this week. With outflows, not only are foreigners not investing in Canada, Canadian pension funds and Canadians are investing outside of Canada.
Yes.
And you can include me in that because the fund I run is a North American equity fund, and my exposure to the States is higher than it is to Canada. And there's a reason for that. And it's not because I don't like Canada. I'm Canadian and I'm proud of my country. But I have a responsibility to go where I'm going to, generate the best returns for the investments. And Canada, sadly, is falling way behind the rest of the world. So even when our own people are not investing, it was a big issue. Last week, there was a group of 90-something pension fund managers, or not pension fund managers, but interests that were saying that pension funds in Canada need to invest more in Canada.
Crazy.
Why?
Crazy.
I'm not going to invest in Canada just because I'm Canadian.
Crazy.
I invest where I'm going to get the best returns.
Yes.
It's that simple.
And it's easy for like a politician to say, no, you need to invest in Canada. Okay, go tell that to the pensioners when they should be making 10% per year, example.
Yeah.
And go, no, you're not going to make 10% a year. You're going to make 3 now because we have to invest in Canadian companies.
Yeah.
They're going to turn unpatriotic. I don't know if that's the right word, but they'll change their tune in 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Whoa. Yeah, I want to support Canada, but I don't want to affect my wallet.
Yeah.
And that's how people actually operate in practice. So.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, you have to have a reason to invest in Canada. We're not exactly the first country that comes to mind for money that flows around the world in investing. I mean, yes, we have a reputation as being a just, fair country with a rule of law, a wealthy population, educated, hardworking. But that's not enough anymore. You have to have other reasons. And one of the red tape, like you mentioned, there's a lot of red tape to do business in Canada. And you mentioned Loblaws. like grocery and health products and stuff like that in Canada, the labeling requirements are unbelievable to the point where companies do not want to come here because of things like that.
And for what? You know what I mean? Like, for what? And it's like, I get the same thing, like, for just my own experience dealing with, so I'll give you an example, car insurance. Car insurance in Quebec is the least regulated in all of Canada. It's still very regulated, so I don't want people to think it's not regulated. It's still highly regulated, but it's the least in comparison to other provinces all across Canada. And guess what? We have the lowest average cost per policy for car insurance by a lot. And just dealing with Ontario and the car insurance, there's so much unnecessary red tape and compliance that you have to go through. These are rules. I'll give you an example. You have to sign an application. I have to print out an application and get the person to sign it. This is from like 25 years ago. Every call is recorded. All the questions that are on the application, I'm asking on the phone. And yet I still need to get that and get them to sign it.
Yeah.
Why? You know what I mean? From some unelected official who probably works 5 hours a week.
Yeah.
You know, and if I don't do it, God forbid, they're up my ass.
Is my face getting redder? I feel my blood pressure starting to shoot up.
No, but it's examples like this, getting permits to build.
Yeah.
I have buddies that work in construction, they're developers. It's a pain in the ass to get permits.
Yeah.
Why? They don't have a reason. And whenever you speak to these people, like if you actually speak to someone who works for the city, like a municipal city, with a municipality in charge of permits, and because they'll never take the blame, and you go, do you think you guys are contributing just a little bit to the increase in housing costs? How would we contribute to that? Well, I don't know. It's a supply issue, right? Yeah. Well, if you guys, it takes over a year to get the permitting process done just to start the build. Do you think if you sped that up to 4 months, it would help increase the supply? No, it's the fault of capitalism. Word for word, someone told me that, who's in charge of giving permits. And he works at a municipality.
Yeah.
That's what he told me. And this guy's never had a job in the private sector in his entire life.
Well,
these are the people who run our country.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who are in jobs that they're not qualified for, without a doubt. Don't get me started on that as far as government
Let's
goes.
get started.
Yeah, I wish. Yeah, if it's more difficult to do business in a jurisdiction, you don't come to Canada just because the government says we'd like you to come and do business here. I mean, this happened recently too with grocers, right? They want more competition in the food industry, so they've asked companies to come to Canada. Well, why? Give us a reason to come to Canada. Like, it's just too difficult.
Yeah,
you know?
And to your point, I read a stat the other day. So Loblaws, Costco, Walmart, IGA, Metro, so 5 companies own 65% of the Canadian grocer market. So there's still another 35. Keep going the way we're going, that will be 80% in the next 5 years, I'm sure. So I think there's an array of issues. Are the profits and the margins padded for these guys? Well, yes, they absolutely are, just like banks are, just like telecom is, just like insurance is. Insurance is getting pretty bad too, I'm not going to lie. But so it's a little bit of, yes, you're kind of taking advantage of the fact that you kind of have a monopoly or oligopoly, we should call it. But at the same time, the environment, the investment environment, or the chances for new businesses or new grocers to actually come into the market are not, they're not fit. Like it's not interesting to them to come.
Yeah.
So they say, hey, you're charging too much for these items, these food items, which they are to some degree. But at the same time, they're like, okay, well, just go shop somewhere else. And other grocers don't want to come.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a catch-22 at one point. You know what I mean? So it's like...
Yeah. And one thing I've noticed, and by no means is it a scientific study, but I like to do groceries. I like to cook, so I'll go to IGA or Metro or whatever. I've noticed a shortage of some things. Like I'll say to the person in the store, "You don't have any of this product right now. We haven't had any for a few weeks. There's like a supply chain issue," and I wonder what the truth is behind that. Are there suppliers within the industry who are no longer sending to Canada because things like labeling or shipping and restrictions might be just not conducive to doing business here. So Canada is not that big of a country when you look at it in a world scale.
Population-wise.
Yeah. Geographically, yes.
Yeah.
If it's difficult to do business, bottom line, that's the story. If you're not going to be rewarded for investing here, people won't invest. They'll go somewhere else.
I'm going to go off script a little bit. Do you think Canada is a sinking ship? It's a serious question.
The evidence would suggest it is. It has been for a while. So how do you turn it around? I don't have the answer to that. It upsets me.
Yeah, me too.
Because we have everything that any country in the world would want to be a wealthy nation. It seems we keep shooting ourselves in the foot with various policies. Energy policies, for example, is something that really is mind-boggling the way we're handling that. Not at the provincial level in Alberta, because they're pro-energy, obviously, but in Ottawa, it doesn't make any sense to me. And there's a million reasons, right? As far as the climate goes, we have to get rid of hydrocarbons. They're killing the planet. Well, is that true? It's unpopular to say I'm pro-oil in any kitchen party or barbecue because you're the moron in the room, but not necessarily.
If you're in Quebec, you're the moron in the room.
Yeah, but we need energy. This has been proven. This week, actually, the SARA conference in Houston, which is the Cambridge Energy Research Associates, hold this symposium every year. It's the most attended energy conference in the world, and it's about all sources of energy. It's not just about oil and gas. So I've been listening to podcasts and following that, and it's very interesting the way sort of things have changed in the last couple of years. Whereas 2 years ago, we were hell-bent on renewables, shutting down oil and gas, saving the planet, and transitioning away from hydrocarbons. So the reality is we can't do it without seriously damaging the well-being of the planet. And there's a million reasons for it. Not every nation is on the same agenda as far as saving the climate. Like poorer nations in the world, they want to use more coal because a lot of their citizens don't even have electricity.
Yeah.
So
it'll help lift people out of poverty.
Yes.
It's like I'll just interject for 2 seconds. I forget the guy's name. He's an environmentalist, but he's like a kind of more of a realist, I guess you could say. And he's saying that the first step to solving the climate crisis of the world, if you want to call it a climate crisis, is lifting people out of poverty first. Why? People who are in poverty don't care about the environment. They're worried about living day to day and feeding their family. If you can't afford to feed your family and there's no food on the table, you're worried about that. You're not worried about what's going to happen to the climate. So the quicker that you can lift them out of poverty, the quicker they can actually go, okay, my family's good, I'm good, I can live day to day, I'm safe. Okay, now I can actually start worrying about other things in life. And that was his theory. It makes a lot of sense. And I just want to interject. I'll let you continue.
Yeah.
Continue going on.
For sure. For some people in the world, probably 1 billion people, I think I saw that number thrown out there somewhere, don't heat their homes. So
yeah,
they would just be happy to heat their home. They're not concerned about global warming. They just want to warm their own homes.
Yeah.
So what caught my attention was, where does natural gas fit into the transition? This is an issue that's picking up steam. That's one issue, is that it's a cleaner burning fuel than coal or oil. And
but double as clean.
It's
50% cleaner than coal.
And electricity, a lot of it in the world is generated by coal-fired turbines or natural gas. So there was a report put out by an economist at a Canadian bank a couple of weeks ago that said this is how sort of misguided our thinking is in Canada. If we were to replace by the way, Canada is number 3 or 4 in the world in terms of reserves of natural gas. So if we were to replace India's use of coal for electricity generation with natural gas, the savings, in other words, the benefit to the reduction in emissions, would be the equivalent to just shutting down the Canadian economy entirely. Anyone who thinks about this in a rational way, if you can replace coal, which is very bad for the climate, with natural gas, which is abundant, cheap, and it's quite easy to do in terms of time and capital application to replace. It's a no-brainer. It's an absolute no-brainer. So if Canada has the potential to be a major player in natural gas as well as oil, why are we not taking steps to help the world transition away from hurting the climate, to reduce carbon emissions? Why are we not assisting countries by delivering them our natural gas? Instead, we make it difficult to extract oil and gas from Canada and transport it to markets through pipelines, which would not only benefit the climate, would benefit Canadians from coast to coast.
Yeah.
Because it's a huge industry in Canada. It builds schools and arenas and hospitals.
It's our biggest industry.
Yeah.
It's our biggest industry.
Yeah.
It's our biggest productive industry in Canada.
Yeah.
Like, people need to understand this. It's like, okay, if we want to get rid of, we need to make this like super clear. If there is no energy sector in Canada, we do not have anywhere close to the standard of living as what we have today.
Yeah.
And when people compare themselves to like, they go, the Scandinavian countries. Let's take Norway, for example. Oh, wow, high tax, but they live really well. Okay, that's fine and dandy. They always fail to mention that they also have massive oil reserves that they use, which helps finance and fund their way of life. And a lot of Canadians do understand that, but a lot of Canadians don't understand that because of politics. And we need to understand how important the energy sector is in our country. It's why we have such a high standard of living and why people want to come to our country, or did want to come to our country up until recently.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't understand that. They think, just get rid of it, we'll have solar. Oh, yeah?
Yeah. That's just people being naive and ignorant, quite frankly. It's not that easy. I mean, obviously, we would all like to transition away from carbon emissions with the planet warming, but it's going to take time. It takes a lot of time. You need to develop these technologies. It costs a lot of money. You need a lot of government support to finance that change. In the meantime, unless we want to go back 100 years in productivity, agriculture being one of them, and another thing about oil is people don't realize what it's used for. I mean, the applications are everywhere for oil. It's not just in a dirty car, internal combustion engine. So it's incredibly important to our economy, well-being of Canadians. Energy security is incredibly important today around
Especially
the world.
now.
Since what's happened with Ukraine and Russia, and now the Middle East. Like that's a tinderbox that any time you could have something happen there. So imagine shutting down the Middle East oil. You need security, and that's what countries want. Investors want security in terms of they need to know that there's not going to be a legislation put in place by the next government to say, well, you have to shut down your oil and gas wells. We're done with that. You have to do that. We're putting you out of business. That's not good for the long term because that hurts security down the road. You have to plan ahead, right?
Would you say that Canada is, for countries that actually have oil reserves and energy reserves, is Canada the most difficult to do business in the world? Is it?
I don't know enough about it. I would say we're definitely towards that end.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. From what I know, it's difficult. It's difficult to build a pipeline. Nobody wants a pipeline running through their backyard. Sometimes you have to realize that there's a cost for the well-being of society. It's just a fact. You have to have an impact somewhere. I mean, they still run, as far as I know, like oil from the oil sands in Alberta. A lot of it, in recent years, has been shipped by train to the Gulf Coast,
which is a lot more
Louisiana,
dangerous.
Texas,
which is a lot more dangerous than a pipeline.
Well, if we recall what happened in Lac Mégantic, the tragedy there, like to think that we're still sending a train with 100 cars of oil on it. There's a danger to that. And so pipelines are safer. The technology is much better today with pipelines. but people don't want, it's the picture of a leaking pipeline. Well, stuff happens occasionally, but we're better at it than we've ever been before. In Canada, the good news is on two fronts. Is one, the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which was the expansion of the pipeline from Alberta through the Rockies to Burnaby, BC, to offload crude for export. That's being expanded from about 350,000 barrels a day to about 800.
Okay.
So it's basically close to a triple. So that probably won't be filled completely until 2027. So now we have a way to get oil to market, which we didn't have before. There's always a fight with the U.S. about pipelines. Anywhere near a lake, they want them shut down. States can say, we don't want a pipeline going through our state. And the first legislation that I think Biden signed when he got into office was to cancel the Keystone Pipeline. I think it was the Keystone Pipeline from Canada to the U.S. So much for for security. On the other front with natural gas is there's the LNG Canada project in Kitimat, BC, that's been being built for the last, call it a decade, because it takes a long time to get these things approved. That should be up and running by the end of the first half of this year, so that's imminent. That's going to send natural gas from Canada to Asia through Kitimat, BC. So now we have a place to sell our Canadian natural gas that's not the U.S. Essentially, throughout history, we've sold it to the States. That's the only place where there's pipelines to send to for consumption, mostly by consumers in California and places like that. So that's another positive that's happening. And what's come from that now is more and more First Nations are becoming interested in getting a piece of the pie. So they're allowing these projects to be built on their property.
As long as they get a kickback.
They get skin in the game, which there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, nothing at all.
Absolutely.
It should be like that.
Absolutely.
It should be like that.
100%. 100%. So those are positive things that are happening. The other thing that Canada has as an advantage with LNG is that if you're shipping it from the West Coast, it's a beeline to Asian markets. So as opposed to the U.S., where the LNG carriers, the ships, have to leave the Gulf Coast refinery or Gulf Coast facilities for
all the way
LNG.
to the Panama Canal, I think, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
all the way
It's
down.
a long way around.
Damn.
So it's a lot
This is
cheaper.
way quicker.
Yeah. So this is a very positive thing. Now, we have to keep going. We have to keep going. We can't stop this.
What would happen if all of a sudden one day Canada was unleashed to produce as much energy as it could?
Yeah.
And I'll just say, so Danielle Smith at the Cambridge Energy Research Week, who was there, so the Premier of Alberta, she posted a tweet saying we are going to double the production of our oil and gas by 2050, and we're also going to be carbon neutral, or I don't even know what that means. But she's basically just saying no, we're going to keep extracting the oil, we're going to sell our oil, and we're going to double our production by 2050. I love how this woman is just basically you always have the whack job, Stephen Guilbeault doesn't know anything about anything, kind of walk around, and she just goes, what'd she say about him? She goes, frankly, I find him very irritating. And she's like, no, we're just going to, the federal government, this is outside of your jurisdiction. The Constitution does matter. You can't just come in, wave your finger and say you can't do that. We are going to do that. And if you get in our way, we're going to, find different ways to do this.
Yeah, there's a way to do it. There's a way to do it in the most least impactful way. And what she means by carbon neutral is that where you are, creating a carbon footprint, you offset it by other things. Part of an example is, that's one. Yeah. I know that the LNG Canada project in Kitimat, I followed that quite closely as they were building it. For example, the facilities to liquefy the natural gas, you have to freeze it to a very low temperature, are powered by, I think it's hydroelectricity in BC. So you're using a green energy source to, for the facility to function. So there's one way that you can do it. But bottom line is, we've had nowhere to send, I shouldn't say we've had nowhere to send our natural gas. We were limited to the consumption in the U.S. So now what's happened, and the big picture is, with what happened with Russian gas being cut off going into Europe, is Europe needed gas. So Americans essentially multiplied the amount of gas, LNG, like liquefied natural gas, that they were sending to Europe coming out of the Gulf Coast, which is the Texas, Louisiana, where there's facilities to do so. So that gas is going to Europe and other places. Qatar is another country that produces.
Didn't Germany come and ask us that question as well? Say,
yeah,
hey,
they wanted us
we
to
get some
build
liquid natural gas, and Trudeau said, I don't see a business case for this.
Yeah, well, they wanted us to build a facility on the East Coast to service Europe.
Yeah.
But the thing about the logistics of it all is, that gas is going to Europe. The Canadian gas will go to replace some of the natural gas that might be used in the U.S., although right now there's so much natural gas, we don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
But sending it to Asia is, and they're partners, right? The partners in LNG Canada are all of the nations like the Sinopec and Malaysian Gas Company and Korean and Japanese. They're off taking this liquefied natural gas. So now we have markets for it. So we should be wrapping up. Biden just announced legislation last week that they were going to put a moratorium on new LNG export facilities in the U.S., which kind of caught some people off guard. But we won't feel the impact of that for probably a decade, because there's enough projects right now that are either in the works, on paper, been approved, or are actually being built. So there will still be a massive increase in liquefied natural gas, or LNG, coming out of the U.S. But then again, that could change, that could stay the same. A lot of it depends on where are we going with it as a transition fuel. If all of a sudden hydrogen becomes a viable one, then maybe technology changes and so natural gas doesn't do as well. That's what we want ultimately, is to wean ourselves off of it. But right now it's the best substitute for coal. So we can take advantage of that in the meantime and ramp up business so we can send as much of our gas as we can to Asian markets. It just makes sense. But it's so difficult to do.
Didn't China just open up like 400 new coal plants? I know they opened up a bunch of nuclear power plants as well, but so basically they just need a bunch of energy. And if you look at their CO2 emissions, I mean, they have the most, they emit the most CO2 emissions in the world by far.
Yeah, they're around 30%.
Yeah, of our world's CO2 emissions.
Of world. Again, depending where you get your research from, right? Depending what the interests are of the people producing the research as well.
Yes.
Keep that in mind.
Yes.
But I was looking at that recently. I think China's 30, U.S. is 24, India was 7.
Yeah.
So now you're getting over
we were
half.
1.52 or something.
1.5.
So I heard this. I want your opinion on this. I heard this argument the other day from some dimwit who basically said, we still should be energy efficient in Canada. If you add up yes, I know we're only 2% of the world's CO2 emissions, but if you add up all of the countries that have 2% or less in the aggregate, it's actually 1/3 of the world's energy. So the first thing I thought was, okay, if I had to guess, if you're going to add up all those countries, 80% of them don't give a shit about the climate, or they don't have the money to invest in technology to make it cleaner energy anyways. Like, what do you say to a guy like that?
Yeah. Oh, well, I don't know what you can say. There's a lot of misinformation out there.
There's so much misinformation. It gets so frustrating.
It's not fashionable to be pro-energy. Let's face it. It's just not.
Well, I wouldn't call it, yes, it's being pro-energy, but it's also just being pragmatic, and it's just like looking at the facts, and as opposed to following an ideology, gas, oil, bad, solar, good, which it is, that's true, but there are just certain realities. And people say a lot of things, but when it starts to affect their wallet or affect their standard of living, all of a sudden things change.
Yeah.
It's like I always laugh at the people like who go to the WEF or these climate consortiums or climate meetings with all the rich and fancy world leaders, and they all take their private jet to get there.
Yeah.
And they lecture us that, we should be driving electric cars and should be eating bugs.
Well, the other thing with that too, don't forget, is the cost of renewables has gone through the roof.
Yes.
Because of interest rates. The availability of the metals that you need for solar panels or for EV batteries mostly come out of China. And so there's supply chain risk there. So you can't really go all in on batteries until we have a supply chain built in North America or friendly nations to get those metals into EVs. You need copper. Projections for copper consumption 5 to 10 years down the road suggest that we are headed for a huge problem with a shortage of copper, because to get a copper mine built these days is very, very difficult. As a matter of fact, there was a story in the news recently, and I follow this because I actually own this company in the fund, is First Quantum Minerals, which is a Canadian copper miner that has operations in Panama. They got an approval to manage the mine. It's one of the largest mines in the world, or was. It became a political hot potato as they go towards an election in Panama. In October, they rapidly passed legislation to shut down the mine. That's it. You're closing the mine. End of story. So what has come from that now is the First Quantum, Franco-Nevada was another company that had royalties, and there's a company called, I think it's Xinjiang Copper of China. They have an interest in First Quantum. They're all taking Panama to court to the tune of about $30 billion, which Panama cannot afford to pay. But apparently international arbitration has a lot of teeth. Like, you pay. There's no way to say we're not paying. Like, they will seize assets to make you pay. So where this stands right now, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but it's because it's something that I follow.
Unless you have all the guns. Then
with great interest, right? It's like, okay, so here's a country where 7,000 people are directly employed. I think it's 30 or 40,000 indirectly by the mine. It's 5% of GDP and 75% of exports from Panama. So basically you have the canal and you have the mine and you have other things that agricultural products or whatever.
So it's basically like the biggest part of their economy.
It's incredibly important to the country, and yet there were street protests, mine blockades. They shut down the port. I mean, First Quantum built their own port and their own hydro facility to power the mine. They're replacing forests that you take out forests to build a mine, but they're replacing it. Apparently this is what's been going on. But when social media fuels a movement and it becomes political, it's like, we'll shut down the mine. I think at some point, there's an election coming up in May. Ultimately, I think people will realize, the social programs, where did they go? Well, we can't afford them anymore. Not only that, we've shot ourselves in the foot in Panama because nobody will invest here anymore. If you allow a country to spend $10 billion building a mine, and then you tell them to shut it down, and you tell them to maintain it as well, right? I mean, it's not good for business.
No, it's not.
So there's a microcosm of, I guess, what we could say happens in some industries in Canada. You can't treat foreign investors like that because they will go somewhere else.
Yes. They
will go somewhere else. So I know in First Quantum's case, they've now ramped up their operations in Africa because it's a friendlier jurisdiction. And they took a lot of action to remedy the balance sheet, raised money, did an equity issue, a bond issue, and so on and so forth. So now they're back in business, but they were incredibly harmed. And I own the stock because I think, number one, it could be resolved, which means the stock price was more than cut in half. So maybe the stock goes back to where it was before, which would be a huge win. Most of the stock, by the way, I bought it after the news, so I didn't, it wasn't like I got caught with it. And secondly, if they win a decision, they're going to make a boatload of money that way too. So to me, it's something that's worth holding. But I'm getting into a specific stock, and it's not a recommendation, by the way. It's just a story of what can happen in the world when we need copper desperately moving forward. Nobody wants to build a mine. Where's the copper going to come from? So to me, electrification of transportation, solar panels, cars, it all comes down to copper. You need copper. And if we don't have the copper, you can't build them. It's that simple, really, in the long run. It's not difficult to understand.
I have another question for you. So I was speaking to one of my buddies today, and this is a rumor. I guess they're floating it around, but one of his buddies is a CPA, and they get the tax news in Canada a little bit before other people, or at least the rumors floating around. I have no idea if this is true or not. This is 100% speculation, but I'm hearing from one of my buddy who works in finance with his accountant friend. Trudeau wants to raise the capital gains tax to 75%. If that was to happen, what effect would that have on Canada?
Well, it would have an effect on Canadians.
That as well.
You know,
Let's start with Canadians.
Yeah, I mean, this is a question where a lot of speculation, like, you can speculate if they said, well, this will be enacted January 1, 2025. Would that mean a massive sale of Canadian securities to get out and pay your taxes before it gets raised? Then again, there's capital flight out of Canadian equity markets, which affects Canada. That could be one consequence of doing that. Again, I'm just speculating. But either way, it's another tax. And at some point, you just can't keep taxing people. And it will impact the economy. So we've already agreed from what the numbers are telling us that the Canadian economy and the well-being of Canadians has been sliding for quite a while.
Yes.
Like to the lowest point in decades.
Yeah.
How do we turn it around? How do you turn it around? How do you make...
Well, he thinks we turn it around by the government taking more and them dispersing the capital.
Well, that's not going to work. It just doesn't. As long as we're a capitalist country, it's not going to happen.
It doesn't work? He told me it works.
Yeah, well...
all the people in the government, they told me that works.
What I'll say...
They know how to manage your money better than you do.
Yeah, it's easy to badmouth politicians because they're an easy target. So I won't make any political commentary, but I'll leave it at this. My view is there's a lot of people running our country that are not qualified to do so. They're just not. Yeah. But we voted them in. So we have to be patient, I guess, and wait to vote them in and bring somebody else in. But who is there? Democracy is kind of in a bit of a sticky position right now because look at what's going on in the States. I mean, the two candidates are probably not the two best candidates out of the 330 million residents that there are in the United States or whatever it is. Yet it's the same people and the same families that seem to be running over and over again. It's a sad state of affairs, really.
Yeah. There's an interesting point from Chris Cuomo from CNN, and he was on CNN, so I didn't really take anything he said. I didn't believe anything he said. So he's gone off on his own. A lot of journalists or reporters, I guess, whatever you want to call them, they're all going off on their own, especially with X. So they're kind of just getting away from the legacy media networks. Tucker Carlson did that. Chris Cuomo did that. And there's a bunch of other people. He said, and he had a really good point, goes, the two-party system in America is absolutely killing us. And they're actually a lot more aligned than people think. And he's like, they just make it seem as if they're always at each other's necks, and they are definitely always at each other's necks. But if you actually look at like their political platforms, yes, there's little differences here and there, and I think ideology has captured a little bit of the Democratic Party, but both sides are like, they're at each other's throats. But the point I'm just trying to make is when you really look at the details, they are a lot more similar than we think, and nothing seems to change. And I think the same thing's going to happen in Canada. It's very likely that the Conservatives are going to win the next election. If we look at the polls, it's not a secret. That's where it looks like it's heading. I'm not convinced that a lot of stuff's going to change.
Yeah.
I really don't think a lot of things are going to change. I think there's institutional rot in a lot of countries in the West right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't disagree.
Yeah, there's something, I always ask people this, there's something deeper going on in society right now, and I can't put my finger on it.
Yeah.
People are upset. People are poor in Canada right now. They can't make ends meet. They see corporations making piles and piles and piles of money, so it's very easy to just get mad at them or get angry at politicians. But, the standard of living is absolutely sliding for a lot of people, and a lot of people are stressed. And I don't know, it's going to be, I think we're heading for... I don't want to say revolution, but maybe.
Yeah. Hey, you can't discount the crazy things happening from once in a while. That's
like in the U.S., sure. I honestly think, and like that election can get absolutely crazy. There is a possibility, I don't think it's a high probability, I hope not at least, that neither side, the Republicans or the Democrats, will not accept the outcome of the election.
Yeah.
Like they won't accept it.
Yeah.
If Trump wins, the Democrats won't accept it. And if Biden wins, the Republicans won't accept it. What happens then?
I think the latter is more likely than the former.
You're probably right. You're probably right. But what the hell happens then?
U.S. politics, I never really followed it that closely until the last election. And then like a lot of people, I became obsessed with CNN. Like it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
Now I don't watch CNN. or MSNBC at all. It's like verboten in the house, and I never had Fox. So I've tuned out of news, which is kind of sad. I get my news from reliable sources, and most of it's business news or related.
Yeah.
Like if I want to know something, I'll look for it. I just found watching television so depressing and so filled with bias.
It's very easy to get angry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
everything had an agenda behind it.
Of course. Like
Yeah.
if you're watching Fox, they're going to report on the news through the lens of a Republican. And if you're watching CNN or MSNBC or ABC, you're going to get the news through the lens of a Democrat.
Yeah,
And right now the parties are absolutely, divided.
yeah.
And, anyways, it'll be interesting to see.
It's almost cult-like in the U.S. I mean,
It is,
you're a member of one cult or the other, and
Yeah.
you're blind to any ideology from the other
Yes.
side, which is scary.
Yes.
That's very scary. And Canada is no different. Like it just dawned on me one day when I was reading news on my CBC app. It's like a political agenda. It's not news anymore. The CBC used to be very reliable, right?
That's why they're dying. They've been capped. But this is what I mean to like the point I was making earlier. A lot of Canada's institutions have been captured by this woke ideology.
Yeah.
And so when, assuming Poilievre gets in for the Conservatives, I don't know how much success he's going to have because the institutions that are most powerful in Canada are going to absolutely hammer him. The media is, liberal leaning. The educational system is liberal leaning. Our army more and more looks like it's liberal leaning. I mean, the Supreme Court system liberal leaning. Like they've infiltrated all of our institutions. I don't really see him having success. I think it's going to be next to impossible for him to have success. And this is just back to the part where it's just, I hope I'm wrong, but I just like I kind of want to stay and fight. But at the same time, it's like I think that we are in a sinking ship. Nations rise and fall. I really hope I'm wrong. But I think we're in a sinking ship.
Yeah, I mean, we need change. At some point, you can't.
But
sustain
I don't think changing a political party is going to give us the change we want.
No, you need some other type of change. Even what's happening, on college campuses these days, there's an agenda everywhere. And
they're brainwashed.
I read it. Yeah, absolutely. I read an interesting article about climate.
Yeah.
And about the anti-fossil fuel movement.
Yes. And these are just one point I want to interject. Why it's so important when this ideology captures educational institutions.
Yeah.
They're the ones teaching our children.
Yeah.
So the kids growing up are all taught the same curriculum as the people in university.
Yeah.
So go on.
Yeah. No, but there was like critics of the climate problem. Like let's say the other side of the argument, let's call it that. I don't think any of us deny the climate is the planet is warming. But this, if you dare suggest that oil has its benefits on a campus, like you're ostracized by your peers.
Yes.
I was reading this, or actually I heard it on a podcast about this professor in a university in the States who floated the idea that, we need oil type of thing, and disputed the claims as to how much carbon emissions were actually impacting the planet.
Got fired?
She had to quit because she was basically ostracized by everybody and then lost funding, right? You don't get funding if you're on that side of the argument.
But where does this lead us? Like, this is the big issue. Where does this lead us when there is it's an echo chamber? So you're only allowed to think one way. And they always claim diversity, which I think is a horrible, anyway, we're not going to get into that. But they claim to be diverse from how people look. When it comes to diversity of thought, don't you dare disagree with me on my opinions. And if you do, you're a bad person.
Yeah.
And this is where it's so hypocritical.
Yeah.
And the other day I went to a bar with my buddy. I'm speaking to this gentleman who went to McGill. I was probably a little snarky because I don't have time because I know they're all woke. And I think I made a comment. And the first thing he just says, because I'm a white male, he goes, "Oh, you look like a racist anyways." Oh my God, I got so mad at this guy. I'm like, "Buddy, I've known you for like 2 minutes, and that's the word you said." I'm like, what school do you go to again? Goes Miguel. I go, there it is.
Yeah.
And I didn't really continue to speak to him.
I mean,
anymore.
you're entitled. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, their point of view. You can't be ostracized because you have a different.
But
point
this
of view.
guy is
That's
brainwashed.
happening on campuses. Like,
yes,
what's
but
the point?
But this guy is brainwashed. I had a nice suit on. This guy is brainwashed to think he sees me, and he goes, you have white male privilege.
Yeah.
That's what he was. He wasn't white. That's what he was brainwashed to think.
Yeah.
I had spoken to him for literally like a minute and a half.
Yeah.
That's the first thing he said to me.
Yeah. Well, some things are out of your control. You know.
Yeah.
I've learned to accept that too. Some things are out of my control.
Yeah. I'm going off on a tangent. Well, talk about. It's always fun to play the speculation game. Where stocks are going.
Yeah. As a rule, I don't make projections. You know that. We've talked about this many times. I know you're not supposed to.
It's a stupid game.
It's the way I manage the portfolio and the fund is I manage risk, I manage opportunity, but in a way you do make a call on certain things in the market, like what sectors will do well, what are the best.
So let's go with that to wrap up this podcast over here. What sectors in the economy, and this could be U.S., this could be Canadian, this could be Europe, this could be wherever, Asia, where do you see opportunity, obviously not naming any particular stocks or companies, but in sectors or countries? Yeah,
right now, as we sit and things change, which is why I don't make prognostications about where the market's going, although I do have a bias. And it's not investment advice, of course. But I mean, energy for sure. Energy is something that we need. We need more of it moving forward, not less. And so how are we going to juggle the climate? Do we have enough energy? And when you say energy, is this, do you include in that renewables? Everything. Everything. Yeah. So when you talk the CIRA this week, right? They talked about that a lot at CIRA, the Cambridge energy event you were mentioning before. Mm-hmm. It encompasses solar, wind, hydro, nuclear, hydrogen, natural gas, oil, coal, wood burning. If you want to go there, everything. Yeah. So that all creates energy, and today electricity is created not by a hydro plant, but a lot of it is created by nuclear or natural gas-fired turbines or coal-fired turbines. And how are we going to make sure that the world is supplied going forward? Because we will need more energy. And one of the simple things, again, this was covered at CIRA this week, and very interesting, is artificial intelligence eats up electricity. I was listening to one podcast where the person speaking said that the average data center, like a larger side data center, which runs 24/7, 365, takes up the equivalent amount of electricity required to power 80,000 households. Holy crap. And that there's a new data center coming online every 3 days. So you're talking about cities of millions of people. Jeez. Okay. Crypto mining is another one. Crypto mining requires incredible amounts of energy. So there was another story that I think it's Amazon had a data center. They were building it close to a nuclear plant, like co-located with a nuclear plant, because they need to know that they have this energy. Mm-hmm. So the demand, based on that thesis with AI and data centers and so on and so forth, and crypto mining, the demand for energy will probably double before we reach the end of this decade. Now, where's it going to come from? So if we go back to, we want to get our power from windmills and solar panels and hydro, we just don't have enough. So how do we get there? How do we get to this point? Obviously, you cannot exclude hydrocarbons. You just can't. Nuclear is interesting. That was my next question. Yeah. What's your opinion on nuclear? Because I know that even in Canada, and this is where I never understand this, and this is obviously where politicians are hypocritical. Yeah. So you claim to care about the well-being of the world and with regards to CO2 emissions, and yet you don't want to approve nuclear power plants. Yeah. I think recently they changed their tune, but like what's going on in Canada? Are we building nuclear power plants? I'm kind of confused. I think Ontario is reopening. Is it the Bruce? Because it's the cleanest energy by far. It's just a matter of, it's obviously dangerous, and where do we store it once we've used it? Yeah. But so like what's Canada doing with nuclear right now? So there's a technology that's Canadian technology, which is a smaller reactor that can be built to power like a specific use, like a smaller city, like pick a place like, let's say, Sudbury. Like you could put in a smaller nuclear reactor that could provide electricity to support the whole town. And there's absolutely, as far as I know, zero carbon impact other than building it. There's a carbon impact. Concrete has a carbon footprint, but that's the cleanest way. Now, obviously, with Fukushima and 3 Mile Island back in the 80s, I guess, and
the Russian
Chernobyl.
one. Yeah, Chernobyl.
Those put thoughts into people's heads that, oh my God, we do not want to have a nuclear accident. So the one in Fukushima was really related to a geological event, right? It was an earthquake and a tidal wave. The other two were just shoddy technology or shoddy safety prevention. And I don't know how many nuclear reactors there are in the world, but we really don't have that many accidents. Its disposal is an issue. But if you want to, reduce emissions, it's the way to go. The other way is hydrogen. Ammonia is another one that's getting some traction, but these are all technologies that require a huge amount of investment to get them off the ground and running, and it's just not there right now. A lot less, carbon footprint with those as well. So that's where the future is, but we're a long way. So then we rewind back to what do we do in the interim? We still need, sadly, coal and natural gas and oil to get the electricity that we need, because who's going to give up their electricity in Canada? Like, find me a citizen who said, yeah, you know what, I'm going to shut off my power. I'm going to live by candlelight and live in the cold. Like, it's easy to say we all want to be, get rid of oil, and we want to save the planet.
Until it affects them.
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone's the same until it affects yourself.
Yeah, so bottom line, we need to find a way to get more energy, not less, a better way to do it, a cleaner way to do it, a safer way to do it, a less impactful way to do it, and that's what's happening. But in the interim, we're not getting away from fossil fuels. And anybody who tells you we are, quite frankly, if the government tells us we won't be selling internal combustion engine cars by 2030,
that's the 2035.
They're lying through their teeth.
2035. I think they're just ignorant. I just think
it's
they don't
politics.
know what they're talking about. Yeah, they don't even know what they're talking about.
Probably both.
I think it's a bit of both, but you have like an ideologue who's the environment minister of our country. I mean, it's pretty obvious he's an ideologue. Nobody takes him seriously. Yeah. And I was hearing on the news that the oil companies, number one, the tides are shifting politically, where the Conservatives are, again, we talked about this earlier, most likely going to come into power. Yeah. So the oil companies are less and less taking their word, the federal government's word, seriously, because they're like, well, you're not going to be around in 2 years anyway. So by the time we start this project, you won't be here. Yeah. We'll get around to that. So the tide is shifting.
But what's happening with oil companies or energy companies, oil and gas, is they're postponing exploration and future projects because they don't know. If you're running a business, you need to know what's going to happen with the next government. Yeah. Like, are they going to say, well, you know what, moratorium on oil and gas and no more oil and gas, so then they're out of business, which is ridiculous. Yeah. But that could be happening. Technology advancements as well. Yeah. Another interesting tidbit I came out of Sarah was how the West is becoming self-sufficient, like Canada, U.S. U.S. is now the number one producer of oil in the world. Canada, I believe, has moved up to number 4. Yep. And I think we're producing this year, expected to produce, it might have been last year, 300,000 barrels more a day for a country that produces 5 million. So it's fairly significant. Back to what you were saying about Danielle Smith saying we're going to double oil production. That is happening.
Energy production,
and being able to get it out of the country is improving. So it looks pretty good, really, as long as we can get off this, stop all fossil fuel production, no matter what, because it's an impossible solution. It's just not going to happen. So let's deal with that.
So do you think, you know what, I like ending the podcast like this. So do you think the future looks bright, or do you think we have an issue moving forward?
I always look at things from the bright side.
The future looks bright.
My nature.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. I don't have anything else to talk about. So Bill, I think this is a good point to wrap it up. I really appreciate your time. Once again, we had Bill Mitchell from, I always mess up. I want to say Palos Wealth Management. What's the fund again?
The fund is the Palos Mitchell Alpha Fund.
Okay.
So that's what the clients who I manage for. That's basically where the equity part of the investment sits.
And how can people get in touch with you if they want to get in touch with you?
W Mitchell I shouldn't put my email out there, should I?
If you want to, you don't have to. We'll put it down in the description.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Or you can check them out on LinkedIn as well.
LinkedIn. There you go.
Yeah, LinkedIn. You like LinkedIn? All right, we'll do LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Always happy to be here.
We'll see you next time.
You bet.